All right, Godtear enthusiasts, we've been exploring the various missions in the game, looking at life, looking at death, building that checklist independent of the warbands, kind of the turn-by-turn, blow-by-blow tactica that we want to try and push out and keep in mind. Now that we have that firm base, we're going to jump back over and explore some of the different warbands and some of the different champions and build a parallel checklist. So this way we have numerous options independent of your playstyle to be mindful of, to keep an eye out for as the game evolves. And we're jumping in with one of my favorite champions, Raith, a very tactically flexible champion that, in a good way, in an absolute good way, when used correctly, can be a real pain for your opponent to nail down. And this is important in a game where mobility is very, very important. Yes, we're fighting over fixed points. That's why we started with the missions, looking to capture these piles of god tiers, but they evolve very, very quickly. So having mobility is always a good thing, especially in a skirmish-based game where you are limited in your units. And to build on that tactica, every turn you potentially get weaker and weaker. Whether you're playing 1, 2, 3, or a custom warband game, you're going to take wounds. You're going to take losses. You're going to lose models. So the mobility is very, very important to have. So the first thing with Raith, he's a shaper. +1 claim action with the banner. That is 99% of the tactica. He is not hanging out, just walking around. He is going to be planting to gain that advantage every single turn. Potentially turn 1 based on his mobility. And we're going to keep that in mind. But the interesting point, what makes him so powerful as a shaper, you're just not going to let me walk up there and claim that pile of tiers. You're going to look to challenge it. And we see this when we explored some of the different Slayer tactica. This is what makes the Slayers so powerful, in that not only do they have the volume of dice and volume of wounds and special attacks to hit really hard, they get into a position next to a pile of god tiers, and yes, they're going to try and claim it, but they're almost like area denial. This makes shapers going up against Slayers challenging, because literally you're putting yourself in harm's way. And Raith has some good attacks. The other shapers, they have decent attacks, with the exception of maybe Shale. But going up against the Slayers, you have to be careful, because they're also going to get that bonus point. So this is where the mobility comes in, and the frustration comes in with the splashlings. What you get to do is move these splashlings around, and almost, I guess you're riding the wave, or you're elemental teleporting. I mean, you can fill in your imagination. You pull Raith along for the ride. He can port and pop around to different places very, very quickly. And this works both if you're first turn or second turn. I can pop in, first turn, get into position, plant. Then second turn, plant, move away. If my opponent goes first and positions themselves and plants, or gets the Slayers into position, I can potentially move up, plant, move away. Now, you're never going to be completely out of harm's way, back and forth, but it's enough that with some minions and other units and blocking, very, very potent. Raith also becomes more of an end game character. We've broken the game down into 3 turns: beginning of the game, mid, and end game. And obviously the score that you get increases up to the mid and then kind of moves towards the end. Based on the missions that place god tiers, with the exception of death, where they're shrinking, these tiers of god tiers, these chain tiers of god tiers, will continue to grow based on what you and your opponent places. So often what we see is towards the end of the game, this kind of cluster that everyone's fighting over, but a couple of trailing tiers at different places. Having Raith to teleport back, plant, get the bonus, get the claim with the flag, and you're out of the battle end game, that's potent. Because remember, again, at the beginning of the game, you're very powerful. As the game moves on, you lose wounds, you lose miniatures, you lose models, you lose units, you lose henchmen, whatever we want to call them. By the end of the game, if it's still continuing, there's not a lot on the table. So being able to have someone teleport back is very, very potent, is very, very powerful. Now, when you remove a splashling, when you use the Kerplash splash movement and you remove a splashling, you also get a boon to place. So this is going to be a little interesting buff if you do have to move into a place where you're vulnerable, then buff yourself up defense. If you're moving into a place where that other unit, that other model, that other champion, that other minion is hurt, or you can easily pick up some points, then you buff on the offense. It's a free buff without an action, so to speak. Now, the downside is with Raith, everyone has a fixed amount of actions that they can take in the game. His nature of expending splashlings means you are going to have to be recruiting as you move. That is also another issue where you expend one, you expend two, then you want to start recruiting because you want to have that mobility to move. It also puts you a little bit at risk depending on the mission and depending on how things play out, where sometimes you take some losses to your followers, your henchmen, and you don't want to recruit. I don't want to bring them back for whatever reason to give points to my opponent. If I don't bring them back with Raith, then I'm kind of just walking. I'm not really riding that wave. So we need to be kind of mindful of that. Let's talk about synergy, because that's important in the game. I mean, 99% of it is synergy between the different war bands and the different champions. The splashlings have an ability tied. They can move a target. One hex. This certainly isn't enough to push away, like we see with Shale and a couple of other champions where you can push away multiple hexes or pull multiple hexes. But the splashlings being able to pull in one, that's interesting from the perspective of if you are playing a warband like Gene or some of the others that can strike in the first phase, you can pull stuff in, almost an alpha strike, hit your opponent before they hit you. You can pull in one hex. Often one hex is the difference between range and non-range. Pull them in and then hit them with other warbands, hit them with other followers, hit them with other minions. It's just enough, and it's just consistent enough that it can help contribute to the points and to the ladders as you go. So think of the splashlings not only as propulsion for Raith, but also as a way to gently pull in other units that are close or not quite there, or maybe I want to move up. So this way I'm not in range of you, but when I activate, I can then move, be in range and attack. Well, when it's your turn, you can possibly pull me in one. And the splashlings work very well with ranged units, because often people will like to dance outside of the range based on movement. If you can pull them in one, then they're in range, then you can light them up. So a lot of interesting, very, very subtle synergy in using both Raith and the splashlings.